For everybody listening, I'm just making this statement to the world at large. I hate the John Dashwoods. Put it on a t-shirt.
Kia ora, welcome to this episode of The Amateur Austenite. I'm Frances Duncan, author, Austenite life coach. My lovely co-host is Rachel Pilwell.
Hi.
Book buyer, Austenite, and all-round nerd.
Okay, forget about the intro bit. Hi.
She just wants to know she's lovely.
I just want you to know I'm here, guys. Hi.
This is Rachel's first chapter of Sense and Sensibility. She's doing the even chapters. In chapter 2, Fanny Dashwood talks John Dashwood out of giving his family any money.
Boo. Bitch.
I was going to call this chapter Fanny Dashwood Master Manipulator, but I think I've landed on money, money, money.
I would go me.
This is the point that Austen's making, right? John Dashwood's already selfish, his wife even more so, and she makes him more selfish.
The John Dashwoods are my least favourite characters in all of Austen.
Kind of a power couple.
Yes, but they suck. They freaking suck, man. I hate them.
Agree. They're now living at Norland. It's their house. That's fair. His stepmother and sisters are now degraded to being visitors. But I thought you're supposed to treat visitors better.
Yeah, you're supposed to be better to your guests than you would be to anybody else. But that's not how they roll.
No, it's pretty uncomfortable. Technically, they could stay there as long as they wanted, but they won't because it's uncomfortable. Fanny treats them with quiet civility, and John treats them with as much kindness as he could feel towards anybody beyond himself, his wife, and his child. There's that selfishness.
And Fanny is the same. Her husband, and their kid. The three of them, they're the only people who matter.
At least their values are aligned.
He loves his wife. He doesn't care for many people, but he loves his wife. One redeeming quality, you love your terrible wife. That part of the reason they love their kid so much is that they just see it as an extension of themselves. Fanny doesn't want John to be kind towards his stepmother and half-sisters, because to be kinder to them towards their own kid is like him not being kind to her and their child. He can only be kind to them and no one else.
There's only so much kindness to go around. Don't waste it on people that aren't us.
Yeah, pretty much.
Interesting. He does say that they can consider Norland their home, ignoring the fact that he is now the patriarch of the family. It is literally his duty to provide them a home. You see it more in like Agatha Christie than you do in Austen. Random relatives living with the family, like someone's ex-mother-in-law because the wife has died, grandparents, distant cousins, etc. Whoever is head of the family, it's actually their duty to provide for the people under them. In this society where people of a certain rank cannot make their own money.
Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Colin is set to inherit. Does that mean, even though they're distant relations, he would then be in charge of the Bennet women? Like, he would become the patriarch of the household. And Mrs. Bennet's always worried about him turning them out. But wouldn't he then have the same duty of care towards them?
This is why he wants to marry into the family.
Yeah.
So he feels like he's providing for them. It wouldn't be quite so awkward to have people living in your house. He could technically kick them out when Mr. Bennet dies, but it is his duty, realistically, to provide for them. John Dashwood seems unaware of this.
He's got an even higher duty than most to care for them. Yeah, it's his stepmother, but those are his sisters. Although we do get the line from Fanny saying that they were only half siblings, which to her was nothing at all.
Yeah. Considering the way her family is, it's not surprising that she thinks that way.
She seems very much like her mother from what we know of Mrs. Ferris.
Yeah, they care about themselves and money and status. They don't care about being good people or caring for other people.
Which is why it's funny that Edward is so different.
That's wild, but if you look at yourself and your sibling, you're quite different.
That's very true. But we have fairly similar moral values, which are actually slightly different from our parents' moral values, to be honest.
So there's that. But you look at Lydia compared to Jane and Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice. I think part of that one, though, is that they've had different parents. The Bennets at the start of their marriage were very different parents to the Bennets when the younger children came along.
That's actually a good point in a large family. Maybe by the time the younger children come along, they're just too tired to be so strict for. They rely more on the older siblings to kind of help with that.
And that's called parentification, and that is not okay.
That is bad and abusive.
Which is what happens to Eleanor in Sense and Sensibility. She is parentified.
So there's the three of them. Marianne is a handful. But it's like, why did Eleanor become parentified? What was her mother doing that she couldn't be there?
She was busy crying.
That's true.
And she doesn't have the same kind of knowledge as Eleanor. She doesn't have the practical thinking.
Eleanor's disposition is very reasonable.
More on this later. The initial plan for the Dashwood females is to get a house in the neighbourhood, which brings to mind for me Mrs. Norris in Mansfield Park. Sir Thomas, who is her brother-in-law, provides her with a house in the neighbourhood. So you could reasonably expect John Dashwood to do this for his family, but he doesn't. Obviously, there's not a dower house.
Yeah, of course. Nowhere for Mrs. Dashwood to move into.
I guess it's not that big an estate.
I find it difficult in this book so far to actually comprehend the level of wealth that we're discussing here. Like, obviously, John Dashwood is quite wealthy, but that's because of his mother's side, not his father's. So, is the estate very large at all? Like, if it's not a lot of money.
Would you like me to delve into the financials?
Yeah, for me, please.
Norland Estate is £4,000 a year. For £10,000 cash, you get £500 a year in the government stocks.
Okay.
So Fanny Dashwood comes into her marriage with £10,000, which means that she has increased his yearly income by £500. He would have at least £10,000 of his own from his mother, because I do not think that John and Fanny would marry on less than £1,000 a year. So minimum, they are living on £1,000 a year. When they move to Norland, they gain another £4,000 from the Norland estate per year, plus the other half of John Dashwood's mother's money, which is at least another £10,000. So at this point, they're at £5,500 per annum.
That's quite a lot.
Compared to his stepmother and sisters have £10,000 between them, which adds up to £500 per annum.
Yeah, so it's a lot less.
They are on a tenth, less than a tenth.
For three of them.
4 of them.
4 of them. Oh my gosh, of course, because it's the 3 sisters and the mum.
Yes.
Dang, that's rough.
It is, and they will need to pay for accommodation. The Norland money comes with Norland Park. They don't need to pay for accommodation. That's part of where their money is coming from, which will also produce a garden, probably an orchard.
Things they can sell and make money on.
and things to reduce their household costs. Which is why it's vitally important that he provide for his stepmother and sisters. When you're talking about £3,000 and you're looking at Norland, that makes £4,000 a year, that's 75% of their money, and that sounds extreme. But you need to consider the £4,000 is an annual amount.
And the £3,000 is a one-off payment.
It is a one-off payment which will give them £150 per annum.
It's not a lot.
It's something like 2% of John and Fanny's annual income that they would move over to the stepmother and sisters, potentially.
And it really wouldn't have been much of a dent for the Dashwoods to give it to them, but it would have been everything for him to give it to the Dashwoods.
That's the point.
See, they just become more and more detestable when you dive into it. I just hate them.
Compare that to Sir John Middleton. This is a better John.
10 out of 10. Not all Johns are bad.
Not all Johns are bad. He provides them a home at low rent. He could probably get more. Not only that, he offers them food, he offers them company. He's quite insistent that they come to Barton Hall as often as they like. Initially, he offers them to stay there until he can make the cottage up to their accommodations, and knowing Sir John, they probably could have stayed there for months or years, and he would be so happy.
That man would willingly have them over for dinner, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day. He's just happy to have them there.
Compared to the John Dashwoods, who are referring to giving away all his money. The new money that he's coming into is separate from the income they already have. It is attached to the estate. Some of that money will go into running the estate. But as we see, he has a ton of money.
They make a profit regardless.
This whole chapter is basically the conversation between the married couple. Fanny Dashwood begging her husband to think again. And it starts with the summarised text of her speech, and then we get the back and forth between the husband and wife. Then as they're getting into the nitty-gritty, we get a little bit more of the detail. She wants to say that Mr. Henry Dashwood was light-headed when he made the request to look after his sisters and mother, which is a thing that's often said about deathbed wills. There's usually a separate thing that happens where someone has to sign off saying this person is of sound mind. She refers to it as giving away half their fortune. It is less than a third of her fortune alone.
Fanny sucks. I hate her, and she's terrible, and she's a selfish one. When we did the season on Emma, we talked about Mr. Woodhouse being a narcissist. In comparison, there is no bigger narcissist than Fanny Dashwood.
I don't know. Is it narcissism or is it just selfishness?
It could be both. But it's not gentle selfishness. It's hard and just firm selfishness.
Because comparatively, we know Mr. Woodhouse really wants people to be okay. He wants to care for them. But he also wants himself to be comfortable.
Whereas Fanny doesn't care about what other people want. She only cares about what she wants.
I wonder whether Mr. Henry Dashwood, John's father, was aware of the sort of man that he was. Similarly to the late Mr. Ferris, did they ensure that they made these promises, or Mr. Ferris ensuring in his will that there's an annuity, because they know the people that will inherit from them will not support the people under them like they're supposed to. Because the line is, he could hardly suppose I should neglect them. This is John talking about his dad. But it's exactly what John does.
That's a really good point, because at the beginning of chapter 3, it's Mrs. Dashwood. She's kind of berating herself for thinking of him unkindly and saying he's ungenerous, because that's how she perceives him. Well, if she can perceive him like that, why couldn't his father perceive him like that?
We are not all blind like Mr. Weston was to Frank's faults.
Yeah, true. So maybe because father loved son, he was blind to it. The only child from his first marriage to his wife who died. Maybe he's more lenient. Either way, it was a failing as a parent.
Sometimes people are going to be who they are regardless of how they're raised. It's a nature-nurture thing, right? Could we lay the fault at the door of the late Mrs. Dashwood? Is it that John got upset at his father remarrying and the love that he had for his new wife and sisters? Did John feel he was replaced? I mean, we don't get any indication that's what happened, but we could argue potentially.
I think it would make sense. I think it's highly likely that the first Mrs. Dashwood would have spoiled her son. Because we don't actually know much about when she died. What if she died in childbirth? Then she wouldn't have been able to spoil him. But if she died later on and they'd had a few years, I 100% would think it's your first child, your son who's going to inherit. It would make sense to be spoiled by your parent. Mr. Henry Dashwood did love his second wife as well, and did love his daughters. And it would make sense for John to kind of feel like his mother was replaced and that he was being replaced with his younger sisters.
I agree. It makes sense that the first Mrs. Henry Dashwood spoiled her son, and if she died while he was quite young, he would have still had that childish sense of entitlement, and maybe he just never grew out of it.
Say that he had that childish sense of entitlement, his mother dies, his father would have, amidst his grief, probably spent even more time babying him and catering to him. And then after a certain time, where he had been probably allowed to do what he wants for the most part, he then gets a new stepmother. Was she much of an authority figure in his life? Because even now you get a lot of kids who don't approve of the step-parent, or some step-parents who feel like it's not their place to take a firmer hand with the stepchild, and especially because John is going to be the inheritor. I know that if I was in the second Mrs. Dashwood's position and I came in and my husband had this child who was maybe a little too big for his britches, but was the one set to inherit, who I was going to have to potentially one day rely on, I'd want to try and get in his good books. But if he didn't want to have anything to do with me, that's really hard.
This is all speculation because Austen doesn't indicate.
And you know what, Jane? That was a failure on your part. We need to know these things.
Sometimes there's not a reason for people being an arsehole. Sometimes they're just an arsehole.
Maybe we're just trying to find justification for his terrible behaviour instead of really understanding the fact that he's just a dick.
And he married a dick.
He married the worst bitch. What is Fanny's excuse for being a bitch?
Her mother.
Yeah. But what's her mother's excuse for being a bitch? We go back through the timeline, we get to the Neanderthals.
So when they're talking about the annuities paid to servants from Mr. Ferris's will, this is really important because an annuity for an ex-servant is like a retirement fund. Mr. Ferris is aware that these servants would not have any money coming in once they are no longer able to work. It shows that Mrs. Ferris does not care about her former servants. And the fact that she's complaining about small amounts, because an annuity is something like £100, £50 a year. The same as John and Fanny are complaining about these small amounts. It's a drop in the pond compared to the amount of money that she has, but she's complaining about not having access to it. Remember when they go to London? She gives the Dashwoods £200 cash, just like that.
Yeah.
It's not that important to her. And her complaining is also ridiculous because it's likely she did not have to deal with any of that. It would have been a lawyer.
Yeah. They would have someone take care of it for them. Like, they probably wouldn't even really have to think about it.
And this is exactly the same thing with John and Fanny. John says it takes away one's independence having to deal with an annuity, but it's a very small amount for them. But to the people receiving it, it provides independence.
Yeah.
And then Fanny goes on to say, you get no thanks for it. You do no more than what is expected, and it raises no gratitude. You don't have to be grateful for something that's expected, for something that's agreed. These people aren't acting entitled if it's something that they're actually entitled to.
I've got a copy of Sensibility in front of me. It is an annotated edition, really beautiful one, by Belknap Harvard Books. And I'm just reading some of these annotations here. If the £3,000 was given to the Dashwood sisters, so like Frances said, it would normally supply about £150 a year. But this note says that that is roughly half of what was generally assumed to be the minimum for support of a single person and at a gentry level, the social class to which they belong to.
So if you're saying that £300 for a single person,
Yeah.
and this will be 4 people
Yeah.
living on £500 between them, so just over £100 per head, when it should be 300.
Yeah. That's for the gentry level social class which they've lived in their whole life. So even if John had been generous, it wouldn't have been enough for them to keep their social standing.
They do get really lucky with Sir John Middleton.
They really do. Because even then they still are losing a social class or two.
Fanny's saying you'll send them presents of fish and game when they're in season. Sir John Middleton does that without being asked. It's a pleasure for him to do it.
He just wants to help.
But he's considering all the ways that they need support, not just I'm going to provide you a house, but I'm going to make sure that you have things to eat. And he is also providing for them socially. It's a shame that a lot of this gets lost in the fact that the socialization at Barton Park is terrible.
They're so far out. There's not a lot of other people there.
Fanny Dashwood thinks that they'll keep no company. They'll basically have no social life. No carriage, no horses, hardly any servants, no expenses of any kind. Conceive how comfortable they will be. What?
No, what do you mean no expense of any kind? You have no expenses of any kind. Your husband takes care of them.
I remember reading Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick.
Yes, that's her biography, isn't it?
And she talks about buying Louis Vuitton shoes to wear to an awards show. When people hit a certain level of fame and money, they get given these super expensive things. But because she wasn't quite there yet, she had to buy them to look the part. It's entirely possible that the same sort of thing was happening in this society, that John and Fanny Dashwood would get a lot more free shit because of the money and the status that they had.
That makes sense. And speaking of expenses, regardless of housing and food, Margaret is quite young. And the expense over time of having to get her larger clothes, like sure, she could potentially wear hand-me-downs from her sisters. But also, which child wants to do that? She's growing. She's going to need new clothes, new shoes. Her sisters are also going to need that. What about dowries and other things that they're going to need in order to go to places to meet husbands, which is what's expected of them? There are so many expenses to be thought about.
Having children significantly increases costs.
What? This is a new concept. No one's ever thought about this, Frances. Tell me more.
You make an excellent point. There are different things that need to be thought about, different costs, as the children age. If it were just Mrs. Dashwood, it would be a really different situation.
If it was just Mrs. Dashwood, then it wouldn't be a problem. She would be able to live semi-comfortably. But having to look after her daughters as well, it's just not feasible.
She might not feel that need of independence as much when it's just her. She might be happy to go and live with Sir John Middleton or other relatives and move around them. I'm sure she'd prefer to be settled, but because she's got kids, she wants to make sure that they have a family home and they have their independence.
Rough.
It is. And this is something that people reading this don't realise. They are teetering on the edge here.
Yeah, they're genuinely on the brink of poverty.
And Fanny Dashwood wants to take more from them. When Mrs. Henry Dashwood and Mr. Henry Dashwood moved to Norland, they brought with them a lot of possessions from their house at Stanhill. And Fanny doesn't want her to take them. She's trying to figure out if there's a way to keep that stuff, particularly a set of breakfast china, because it's much prettier than the stuff that Norland Park has. She thinks it's too handsome for any place they can ever afford. So even though she said this whole chapter, they'll be fine, they'll have lots of money, she's actually aware that they're not going to have a lot.
Yeah.
And she still wants to take more. And this stuff is very, very definitely theirs. You could argue the £3,000 John's talking about giving them, not clearly theirs. But this stuff Mrs. Henry Dashwood bought into that house, it should leave with her.
Fanny, if you really want it, you could buy it for £3,000.
So when we were doing the book club, the question that I posed for discussion on this chapter is based off a quote from Fanny. So I shall pose to you. What assistance do you think would or should be reasonably expected of John Dashwood for his stepmother and younger sisters?
I think he'd be well within his rights if he had not made the promise to his father on his father's deathbed. You don't really owe them anything, but you did make that promise. You did promise your dying father, and you acknowledge that the promise must be fulfilled. In which case, I think the reasonable thing would be £3,000 is going to be barely a dent for him. It isn't going to be that much for the 4 women. So I actually don't even think it's enough. He would need to give them at least 4,000, which still isn't that much. He would need to make sure that if he wants them to leave Norland because he wants to move in, it would be reasonable for him to help them find suitable accommodation and move them there. Make sure they lived comfortably, and if they did have any other little things that needed to be done at the time of them moving, he should see to that. Whether that extends beyond, maybe he doesn't really need to look after them after that. He's kind of like, well, I fulfilled my promise of making sure they were okay after they moved out. I think actually the nature of the promise is you have to look after them indefinitely, in which case he should be sending them money yearly. He should be making sure that the daughters have what they need and making sure that his sisters have enough to find appropriate husbands.
So what I'm hearing from you is, yes, the £3,000 minimum.
Yeah.
You said 4, so some for Mrs. Dashwood as well. Find them a house, move them to that house, and provide an annuity and continue to provide social and financial support.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Ensuring that his sisters make good marriages, that they're meeting the correct people.
Up until the eldest is married, up until Eleanor is married. And then it's like, cool, well now it's her husband who should take on more of a role looking after the family, and John should step back then.
That could be a reasonable assumption.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd always think that, but considering who John Dashwood is, yes.
Yeah. It confounds me how much the Dashwoods are able to just self-justify everything, but they are terrible people. I hate the John Dashwoods.
I do not think you're alone in that.
No, they suck.
And that is our discussion of Chapter 2 of Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I've been Frances Duncan. This has been Rachel Pilwer.
Bye.
Thank you for listening, and we wish you happy reading.
Just so mad about them. They made me angry, man.